That's right, it's the 7th anniversary of Halo Reach, and I'm going to celebrate by shitting all over it. Damn, I'm a glutton for punishment. Halo Reach. Now hold on a second, I know what you're thinking and probably doing right now. You're already starting to type in the comment section, even though you haven't seen the full video yet. You just saw the title. I'm telling you, stop, take your fucking hands off the keyboard and watch the whole damn thing and then comment. First of all, you'll be happy to know that unlike Halo 2, I do not hate Halo Reach at all. I actually enjoy it. I think it's a good game and even a good Halo game overall. No, it's not that at all. I just don't like Halo Reach as much as the other Halo games with the exception of Halo 2, and today I'm going to break it down for you as to why I feel the way I do. And if you haven't already guessed, this is the second part of a series of videos that I'm doing to rank all of the Halo games, with the one talking about Halo 2 being the first, and the other ones will follow. So I'm ranking the Halo games from least favorite to most favorite, and I'm going in order that way. This is basically an expansion of my Halo Time Travel and Evolution video, where I did mini reviews of all the Halo games that were out at that point. Halo 5 was not out at that point, and so I'm including it in this series. And you know, the thing of it is, I feel like in a lot of ways, Halo Reach suffered the same issues that Halo 2 did in that it was overhyped. And why wouldn't you overhype Reach? Unlike other Halo games, this actually has a setting that players are familiar with way ahead of the game. No, seriously, even if you never read the book The Fall of Reach, the events that took place on Reach and the fall of Reach itself is referenced in nearly every major Halo title. When I think of the actual fall of Reach, I think it's basically their Pearl Harbor or 9/11 of their universe. It's like 9/11 because it's an extreme unexpected tragedy, and it's like Pearl Harbor because Reach was the military industrial center for all of humanity. Because of the way Reach was described in the book as being this souped up military installation, whenever I pictured Reach, I pictured the Death Star if the rebels took control of it. That's no moon. That's a space station. And the events in the book are pretty interesting too. The reason that the whole military buildup was there was because they were fighting an insurrection. Then halfway through the book, the Covenant show up and take humanity completely by surprise. They start one-shotting world after world, glassing them, killing millions of people in the process, and eventually they show up on Reach. And this is important because Reach is not only the big military complex of humanity, but it's also at Earth's doorstep. So if Reach falls, Earth is not going to be far behind it. When the Covenant finally find Reach, they show up in this massive armada, a surprise attack of over 300 Covenant cruisers, and this is the type of motherfucking battle you bring your brown pants to. And the UNSC puts up a great fight, but ultimately they lose. They fail. The fleet gets completely wiped out, almost all the Spartans are killed off, and ultimately the planet is glassed and destroyed. This is an unexpected tragedy for the humans, and they know at this point they are on the brink of extinction. So when I first heard they were going to turn the events of Reach into a video game, I'm like, yep, gotta have it. That's a must. And I'll admit, I was so excited for this game, and I feel like that is part of the problem there, is that I was overhyping this because of all the knowledge that I had prior to the game coming out of the planet Reach and everything that happened to Reach. So before I delve into this anymore, let's start out with the things that I really did like about Reach, because I don't want to go completely negative here, because there were things about the game that I really did enjoy. First of all, they finally got rid of those stupid English-speaking Covenant. Now, if the player came in at Halo 2 or later, they were probably a little bit confused, and I still wasn't happy that the grunts couldn't speak English either, but at least now it was back to science fiction instead of that space opera bullshit that Halo 2 and Halo 3 pulled off. I like the fact that the weapons were unique again. In Halo 2 onward, they felt like they had to have Covenant equivalents to all the human weapons, which made no sense to me. But in Halo Reach, they dial it back a little bit, and like with Halo Combat Evolved, all the weapons feel very unique and very different with each other for the most part, even if some of them, like the plasma repeater, are completely useless. For those two things alone, thank you, Bungie. Thank you for finally listening to your fans. This is also the only Bungie Halo game where they had campaign, matchmaking, firefight, and forge all on one disc, and best of all, they had matchmaking for all of them except for Forge, but you didn't really need it for Forge, but they had matchmaking for everything else, and that was cool. And finally, to top it all off, it was the only AAA Bungie title for Halo that did not have the Flood in it at all. It's only the Covenant that are in it this time. You were fighting the full force of the Covenant Empire. And that all sounds fucking awesome, right? So after all that, how can it fall below my expectations? Okay, so first let's talk about the campaign, because that's my personal bread and butter, and if the campaign sucks, then the game isn't worth my time. So as I already said, if you're a Halo fan who's been playing, especially since Combat Evolved, you already know a fair amount about Reach, so this was supposed to be the game version of that. At least so I thought, because in the book, most of what you find out that happened on Reach, the big battle that happens at the end of the book, happens in space. But there is stuff that happens planetside too, and that's what the game focuses on. And at first I thought that was going to be a good thing. We get to see a different perspective of the war and find out some new information. But it doesn't happen anything like it did in the book. In the book, the Covenant show up with a surprise attack force of 300 cruisers, But in the game, you find out that the Covenant actually came to Reach sooner. We're talking days before. As a matter of fact, they got on the planet 12 fucking hours before anyone knew they were there. And when the UNSC finally discovers that the Covenant are on Reach, you hear the guy announcing it over the radio, and he sounds bored. He's sitting there going, the Covenant are on Reach, the Covenant are on Reach. And I'm like, dude, you should be fucking shitting your pants right now. There should be some anxiety in your voice. What is wrong with you? To me, that's like if a Russian warship showed up about 20 miles off the coast of Florida, it started invading overnight, 12 hours before anyone even knew what was going on, and the governor of Florida comes on and says, oh yeah, the Russians are here. That's what this felt like. I mean, Reach, of all things, you should be panicking. This is the military epicenter of humanity. This felt completely underwhelming compared to the events that happened in the book. And so to help combat this threat, we get in the shoes of Noble Team, more specifically Noble 6, and most of these guys are Spartan 3s with the exception of George, who was a Spartan 2. The Spartan characters themselves really didn't stand out. A lot of them felt overly cliche. You have the silent type, the crazy guy, the smart girl. The one that really stood out for me was George, because he was the sympathetic one, the father figure. He was the one who looked out for everyone else, not Carter, the cliche leader one. And I can't tell you how many times that bitch cat drove me off a fucking cliff. Although, to be fair, when I found out what the actress looked like who plays Cat, I started cozying up to her a little bit. And it's funny because in Ackman's video, he points out that Reach is more of a settings-focused game than a character-focused game, and I agree with him. The problem with that is, even though that worked for Halo Combat Evolved, it's because that was the first game out there. We knew nothing about Halo at that point. By the time Reach rolled around, Halo had been around for 9 years, and we saw some serious character development over that time period. Reach just did not have that. So as I'm moving through the first few missions of the game, I noticed that we're back to the linear scripted concepts that Halo 2 had. It's not like it didn't have any open worldness at all, but it was a lot more restricted than we had seen in Halo 3 and Halo 3 ODST, and that was disappointing to me. So this goes on for the first few missions of the game. That was the disappointing part for me, and then we get to the mission Tip of the Spear, and the Covenant supercarrier appears. Then somehow after that, the carrier managed to get to space without getting attacked at all. This is what gets me right here. After everything that I thought Reach was, it has all these orbital MAC cannons. It's supposed to have this massive fleet, and none of it's there to combat the Covenant. This makes no sense to me. We saw the MAC guns work earlier in the game, but apparently they're not later on in the missions. And then there's this soundbite from the AI Dot who says the next battle cluster is like 36 hours out, and I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You're in the heat of an interstellar war. Reach is your most important military installation. Why don't you have an entire fleet of your ships protecting it? But it gets better. They have to destroy the supercarrier by hijacking a Covenant Corvette and putting a slip space drive in it because for whatever reason they don't have any nuclear weapons. And then to top it off, my favorite Spartan in the game, George, the one that I could relate to the most, dies in that mission halfway through the game. Okay, so when we finally got the first half of the game out of the way, the rest of it felt more on point with what I was expecting. You see cities being destroyed, you see the planet being glassed, you see cities in trouble, civilians trying to escape. To me, that felt like what I was more along the lines of expecting from Halo Reach. I still didn't completely understand why they stuck around in New Alexandria for so long, even though the city was being completely glassed, but you know what, at least it made it look interesting in terms of gameplay, and it made you at least see what kind of destruction the Covenant were causing planet-side. But then we get to the mission, The Package, and this is where you find out you're supposed to deliver Cortana to the Pillar of Autumn, who will eventually be delivered to the Master Chief. Once again, this contradicts with the book itself. In fact, it doesn't seem like anyone really has their story straight as to what is canon at this point. If you look at the Halo Wiki, it says one thing. If you read Halsey's journal that came with the Legendary Edition of Halo Reach, it says something completely different. But you know what? The thing of it is, even if you think this is canon, it doesn't match up. The book is not considered canon. There was an interview done with the creative director with Reach, and he said, when he was asked, what about the conflicting canon between the Fall of Reach and Halo Reach, he said, the game canon comes first, basically implying that the book didn't mean anything compared to the game, and that was their stance on it. That stance right there is why I stopped taking the book seriously, and why I hate the fact that now they take the books too seriously. As all these events are taking place, you see all the Spartans being killed off one by one, and we knew this was going to happen. Even the tagline of the game is, before it begins, you know how it ends. But you never really feel for their deaths. None of them are emotional or anything. Some of them are, I guess, symbolic of the type of character they are, but they just feel like they're shoehorned in there. They don't feel like it should have happened the way it did. There's even this one part where the leader of the team, Carter, just plows his Pelican into a scare, but we've seen in the past that Pelicans packs some pretty impressive firepower, and even though he's mortally wounded, he probably could have hung in there a little bit longer to support Noble 6 and Emil. Okay, so the campaign was disappointing, but what else? Let's talk about multiplayer for a second. They did something very unique with Reach, where they made all the maps from multiplayer and Firefight ripped from campaign, which some people like that, and that's fine, but there was no real place in campaign where I stopped and said, this would make an excellent multiplayer map, unlike places in Halo Combat Evolved and Halo 3. Again, some people may have liked that, but I saw that as lazy. They didn't feel unique to the campaign. They weren't special. And that's kind of the thing. I can list almost every single map from Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2, and Halo 3, but I blank when it comes to Reach. I even blanked on what the name of the Blood Gulch remake was. I had to look it up to find out that it was called Hemorrhage. Even now, I cannot remember a single multiplayer map from Reach other than that one and technically Forge World, even though that really wasn't a map so much as it was a canvas. And when you started adding things in like loadouts and ordnance drops and armor abilities, it started feeling less like Halo and more like Call of Duty. And yes, for all of you who hate the concept of sprint in Halo, guess what? It came from Reach. The armor abilities are sort of a unique but dividing situation in the Halo community. The reason why equipment works so well with Halo 3 is because you could only use it once and you had to use it strategically. If you didn't, you could be put at just as much of a disadvantage as you could an advantage. But the armor abilities in Reach didn't make sense. They felt like they were shoehorned in there. This felt like a prelude to Destiny more than anything else. And on top of that, I'm pretty sure that most of us hated the concept of armor lock. So after having a blast with multiplayer in Halo 3, I got to Reach and was like, you know what, I'll pass on this one. And this leads into Forge World. Now the concept sounds good. It's the biggest Forge map we've ever had. We have more options than we did in Halo 3, but it still didn't feel right. I guess even though the map was the biggest one we'd ever seen, it still felt a little restricted. You had a lot of death barriers, which apparently are all over Reach. I mean, Forge World was the biggest Forge map we'd seen yet, but it still didn't feel great. You had the side of a mountain, you had the Blood Gulch Canyon, you had a few other little areas as well, but it didn't feel as cool as the sandbox map in Halo 3, where you had a flat surface, you had a subterranean level, you had a skybox on top of that, and I felt like people had the ability to be more creative with that type of thing. With Forge World, I felt like it was definitely more limited in terms of that. And all of those things would have been fine if they had left Forge World maps out of matchmaking. I think that's what really got me the most, because you always had the same thing. Even though you were playing on a different map, it felt like the same map. It was always blue skies, green grass, and Forerunner structures. It never really felt like anything different or diverse. And that would have been different if they had added at least some interior structures into Forge World, but they didn't. So it always felt kind of mundane and repetitive. And just like with ripping maps from campaign, it felt lazy. And lastly, we have Firefight Mode. Now, I loved Firefight in Halo 3 ODST. I was really excited to see that they were bringing it back for Halo Reach, but it just didn't strike the same note that ODST's Firefight did. It's really hard to pinpoint it exactly, because in both games you're only fighting Covenant. In both games they ripped the maps from campaign, but I guess it was a combination of how the enemies fought you, the fact that you could turn on invincibility and it took the challenge out of it, and the maps just weren't as good. Like ODST's campaign had places where they could afford to do that. They could afford to take places from the campaign and put them in Firefight, but Reach really only had like one, and that was the part on the package. And by the way, that's a mission I like, because something in there is named after me. Yes, the Covenant AA gun known as the Tyrant gun. So that's a little Easter egg for you right there. But again, the Firefight maps felt small, restrictive, the Covenant were overly aggressive, and to be honest with you, when 343 stepped in, to me, that was a massive improvement. You saw much larger Firefight maps. My favorite one is the one when you're on the original Halo ring. You have AIs actually helping you out, so you get allies helping you against the Covenant. That was awesome. I wish that hadn't been the last Firefight map that we'd seen for Halo Reach, because they could have used that concept going forward and just further improved on the concept. So now we get to the actual title of the video. You've already heard my personal opinion about the game itself, so why do I say it's overrated? The answer is pretty simple. Reach didn't really bring anything new or mind-blowing to the table. When you go back and you look at all the other Halo games, you look at Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2 and Halo 3, Combat Evolved was just a new thing in and of itself. It was a new way to play a first-person shooter. Halo 2 added vehicle hijacking, dual wielding, and Xbox Live compatibility. Halo 3 added 4-player online co-op, theater mode for both campaign and matchmaking. It added Forge mode for the first time. You had the Bungie.net file share that could also render your videos in real time on the site. And of course, it also added equipment. And once you loop Halo 3 ODST in there, it also added firefights. When you look at Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2 and Halo 3, the games continue to add features and things to each game without taking anything away from the predecessors. Halo Reach was the first Halo title to do exactly that. Not only did it take things away, but it went off in a completely different direction at times. First of all, it took dual wielding away, which I don't understand why they did that. It was never really a concept that was negatively received. I know some people didn't like it for multiplayer, but why take it away from campaign? The levels felt more scripted. They added armor abilities in, which a lot of people just flat out didn't like, and it didn't feel like Halo. And the fact they added matchmaking for campaign was fine, but to be honest with you, it really wasn't too difficult for me to find 3 friends to play with. Honestly, the best part about Reach is the fact that it took the best elements from Halo 3 and Halo 3 ODST and put them all into one. There was nothing groundbreaking that was added to Reach, and I feel like that was part of the problem right there. I had nothing to grasp, nothing that I could say, this belongs to Reach and only Reach. And I guess to me, that's what made it feel a lot less like a Halo game and more like a Call of Duty game. But all in all, I will say I really appreciated the ending. I like how it brought the whole Bungie saga to a full circle, and I gave the Pillar of Autumn a salute as I saw it drifting towards that impending ring of doom. I think overall, Reach is a fun game. If it's your favorite, that's great. I still enjoyed it, but it just wasn't as good as some of the other Halo content out there. Is it worth buying? Absolutely. You should definitely get Reach if you don't already have it, and to that end, I will say that Halo Reach is worth buying on sale. I know that may not be exactly what you wanted to hear from me, but I don't always have the most popular opinions in the Halo community. Despite that, I still express them because at the very least, I feel like I need to be honest with you. I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell you the truth. So having said that, Halo Reach, is it your favorite Halo game? Is it your least favorite Halo game? Or does it fall somewhere in between? You can let me know in the comments below or hit me up on Twitter at MythicTyrant. A link to my Twitter feed can be found in the description below. And if you like this video and you want to see more, and you want to stay up to date on all your Halo news, tips, tricks, and secrets, click that subscribe button for more great content every single day right here on MythicTyrant.com. Thanks so much for watching, guys and gals. I'll catch you right back here next time. And as always, I'm the Tyrant, signing off.